instructor-led introductory workshop. So, you ready to go?
Born ready.
Born ready. All right.
You have to ask that.
I mean, you have to, right? We can't get away from it. So, okay. So the first thing, so we're going to get our screen up here. So I got a bunch of links that are sitting up here on the main, on the main screen. So first thing, of course, there's a Discord that you can join if you need help a little bit later on. So if you want some help after you've already started, you can join our Discord, and we will be out there. There's a special channel just for people who are coming to this session or these sets of sessions. So go out there and join us, and we'll be happy to help you beyond just right now. We'll be happy to help and do office hours or help out however you can as you get stuck going through these modules. The first thing we're going to look at today is the learning path itself, and we're going to go through getting your developer directory set up and all sorts of fun stuff. So the first thing is, let's get over to our learning path. You can get to it at aka.ms/45show/learn, and that's going to take you here, which is implement Microsoft Identity Associate. Okay. There are 5 modules in this path. Getting started with identity, application types, permission and consent, secure custom APIs, and working with users, groups, and roles in apps and your APIs. So today we're going to hit the first 2. So we're going to do getting started with identity and application types. So if you've never used Microsoft Identity before, if you've never used Azure AD, you're totally welcome. This is the thing for you, right? After that, next week, we're going to hit permissions and consent framework. And then the very last one will be the following Monday. And we're going to do the last one, which is all about role-based authorization and things like that inside of your APIs. So head on over here. You'll have to log in with a Microsoft account of some flavor. It could be your corporate account, like for work. It could be your like work or school account. It could be your personal account, like your Hotmail account or whatever. All accounts are welcome. So we're going to go over to this first link, this 45 show WAC learn link, and we'll get started here. And mine says continue because, of course, we've run through this a few times, but yours should say start. And so we want to start it up. And we're going to get started with this, getting started with Microsoft Identity one here first. However, before we do that, if you don't have an Azure AD directory or tenant, you'll hear them called both. If you don't have an Azure AD directory, we need to go get one of those first. And so that's this link here, which is 45 show WAC dev env. So this will give you a free Microsoft E5 developer directory. So it's got sample packs of data and all sorts of stuff, but everything you need to do the exercises that we're going to go through, you can get with one of those free directories, and they expire after 90 days, and you can go in there and renew them. So you can renew them as long as you're using them. So
in fact, they automatically renew, which is great. You don't even have to go and renew them. You'll get a notification saying your subscription has renewed for eternity. You don't have to do anything for that.
Yeah. So you'll get if you're an MSDN subscriber, you get a free one forever too. So if you've got MSDN at work or Visual Studio subscription, whatever it's called now, I don't know if it's still called MSDN or not. But if your work or your school pays for Visual Studio Enterprise or Professional, you also get one of these free with your with that Visual Studio subscription too, which is pretty cool. In fact, that's what I use for my personal email. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that. You're not supposed to use it for production, I don't think, but whatever.
We'll cut it out later. Don't worry.
It's okay. It wouldn't be the first time. So anyway, so we're going to go over here first. If you do not have an Azure AD account that you can use, and preferably not one, if you don't have a directory that you have sort of total control over, you probably don't want to go through these exercises with the one at your office or at your work, for example, because chances are you won't have the right permissions to do the stuff that we need to do. So if you don't have one, just go and we'll go over. In fact, we can go take a look at this link quickly, and we'll see what's out there. So you'll find the Microsoft 365 Developer Program. Just bang on that big Join Now button, and you notice I've already got one here. If you don't have one, you'll have a setup subscription or add a new one over here, which is pretty straightforward. Choose your region, choose your country. I'm in the United States, so I'm going to choose the United States. I'll create a username. I'll just use my name. I'm going to create a domain, and we'll call this MS Reactor Learn.
Demo.
Oh, it's too long. Learn. I'll just call it MS Reactor. That way I can squat on that domain name for a while.
That's how we make profit, people. We just squat on important names.
And then give your account a password. And that's really kind of the extent of it. So this domain name, you want to remember it because you'll notice my username now is jpda@msreactor.onmicrosoft.com. So this is the account that you're going to use to log in. So make sure you remember it, write it down. I'll put mine in Notepad.
Password manager, please.
So see, I'll never put mine in here because I always end up with a bunch of
.microsoft.com stuff.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. I don't need to go through 48 passwords every time I want to log in. Then you're gonna have to put in your phone number. I guess I'll put mine in.
Use the 877.
It's too late now. Too late now. So anyway, so I'm gonna get a code. Let me go over here and get my code. You're gonna have to put in a phone number. So that's one thing you have to do. Please don't put in my phone number because I won't tell anybody. I won't tell you what the code is. So you put in your phone number. And let's see, 25513. And you're going to get a code. You're going to want to use that code. Pretty much just make sure that you're a human and that you're not out here spinning up tenants automatically. So I'm going to set up our developer subscription. And it only takes about a minute or two. And then once it's ready, there's a bunch of extra stuff you can add in. Excuse me. There's a bunch of other stuff you can add in. Like you could add in a bunch of sample data. So we have sample data. We call them sample data packs. And it's got like user data, mail data, SharePoint data, like files and stuff, email calendar, all that sort of stuff.
I would highly recommend the at least the user and the graph data, right? Because it helps you with subsequent tasks.
So some of the things we're going to do this time around, we're definitely going to need users, and we are definitely going to need mail and events. Now, we won't necessarily need those today, but you will need them definitely for next Monday, because I think next Monday's sessions, we've got some stuff where we're looking at mail and stuff like that. So when you click the users button, and yes, to answer your question, Sahil, in a developer tenant, you can add a custom domain. I would warn you that if you add a custom domain and it expires, your custom domain will end up in purgatory and you may never be able to verify it on another tenant. So if you do this and you decide to use your own custom domain name instead of the onmicrosoft.com one, just know that within your 90-day window, you need to remove it so that it can be used elsewhere. So I'm going to click on users. So we'll just add this, click on add users. It's going to give me my username. I'll go ahead and copy that. Have your password ready. I can do that. So let me get signed in here. And I'll put in my password. And now it's telling me there are many, many permissions that are required here. It's going to read and write and have access to files. And this is essentially because it's going to be pushing a bunch of data in. Now, of course, if you just signed in with the account that you just created, then that's totally cool because there's nothing in there anyway. If this doesn't have the account that you just created at the top, we want to go back and start over because that's going to end up being, that could end very poorly for you and for anybody who you're connected to. So make sure that the account that's up here at the top of this window is the same one that you just signed in with. So we're going to scroll all the way down and hit that accept button. And by hitting accept, we're going to let a bunch of things in the background go and start off. Now, we got to give a password to all of our shared users. This should probably not be your admin password, but this is the password that all of the sample users are going to have, right? So we're going to create 16 users. All those users are going to have licenses. They're going to have a bunch of fake data created. Their password is going to be the shared one that we put in right here, right? So make sure you remember it, write it down, do whatever. And type it correctly or type it the same way twice. Be another good way to start. So I'm going to give this thing a shared password and then click install. And this is going to take a few minutes, so we don't have to wait on it. Primarily because it's going to go run a bunch of code and in the background, and it's going to go push a bunch of data in. So we don't have to wait on it because the stuff we're going to do today, we don't need it just yet. As long as you've got an admin account and you've got your new directory set up, then you are ready to go. We will want to come back and add mail and events before the end of the day today. And that way we'll have our mail and events for next week. But
it takes a little bit of time to generate these. So we don't want to be sitting around waiting for 10, 15 minutes for the data to be generated.
Yep. So we can always come back. We can always come back and add this. You can always hit this from this AKA link here, the 45 show dev env dev environment one. You can always come back and reset your password and do whatever kind of stuff you need to do here, right? And to answer your question, so he'll know, it includes everything inside of Microsoft E365 with the exception of Windows licensing and Teams voice. So there's no voice. There's no voice with this because voice, of course, there's team to Teams voice, but there's no PSTN voice where you're calling out into the main phone network because that costs, that's very much a fixed cost that Microsoft can't
Make free.
Eat.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you'll get everything though, all the security stuff, Teams, Outlook, email, OneDrive, SharePoint. You get all that sort of stuff as part of this. You just can't make phone calls to regular, normal 10-digit telephone numbers or however many digits they are where you live. Okay. So let's go back over to our implement Microsoft Identity. This is up here at this Learn link. And we're going to get started. Now, there are going to be a few things that you need beforehand. You do need Node.js installed on some machine, preferably the one that you're going to be doing this workshop on. So you will need Node. You'll also need .NET. It's a very interesting workshop in that it uses both Node and .NET. I don't know why.
We're inclusive.
I don't know.
All technologies.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We're also going to do some front-end JavaScript stuff, but that just requires vanilla JavaScript. We're going to use VS Code today because VS Code is super simple, super easy, and super fast. So make sure you download VS Code. You could also do it in, whatever your IDE of choice is, but we're going to be doing all of ours in VS Code today. So make sure you get these downloaded and installed. For .NET, you can use .NET 5, whatever's current out there on the .NET website today. Each one of these links will get you the 3 prerequisites that we have for today in terms of technology on your machine. So, you ready to go? You ready to dig in?
Ready as I can be. Right. So,
all right. So let's get started here with. Did we lose Christos? Somebody must have started streaming a YouTube video at his house. The place I used to work years ago, we had a 10 megabit line to the internet, and every time somebody would watch a YouTube video, the whole office would just slow down. We'd all go home for the day. Anyway, okay, so let's go ahead and let's get into our getting started with Microsoft Identity. We'll get the link out into the chat so that you can go take a look at it. But this is the first module that's coming off of this link here. Are you back, Christos?
I should be back. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Can you see me?
Yeah, we can now. We kind of lost you for a minute.
There was some glitch on my internet. There you go. Technology.
So we're going to start here at Learn. We're going to start here at the learning path. And the first one we're going to do is getting started with Microsoft Identity here at the beginning. Now, there's a bunch of stuff to read, but since we're here, we figure we'll just tell you the stuff out of the reading parts, and then we'll go do the exercises. So if you go through each one, though, there'll be a little next button, and you'll get some XP. Now, I have to admit, I don't know what you can use the XP for, but I'm sure it's a good thing. But you'll get it.
It's a gamification, and there's a leaderboard somewhere that shows how people are progressing.
That's cool. So you get the MS Learn XP, which is cool. But more importantly, you get to spend 2 hours listening to us talk about identity and developers. What could be better than that?
And
anyway.
there are some tests as well that test your knowledge as you go through. So as you progress through modules, there might be some questions that you need to answer.
Yep.
So pay attention.
So this is going to tell you pretty much the prereqs. So we're going to need to do JavaScript or TypeScript, .NET Core. It says you need basic knowledge of OAuth, but we don't necessarily have to. You don't necessarily have to have deep knowledge of OAuth at all. VS Code and access to a directory. And we have a directory now because we just created one from the dev directory. We created our new dev directory. So I think we're ready to go. So let's go on and continue. And this is very long, and you're free to read it. Don't let me stop you from reading it. But it's very long. The net result of all of this is that when we're at work, when we're at school, we use a ton of different types of applications, right? And if we go back and think about like I've done enterprise development for 16 years now. And a lot of what we would build software historically, and we had to build a lot of it ourselves. And if you bought software, somebody still had to install it and they had to put it on a server and do all that sort of stuff. And of course, those days have changed quite a bit, right? Where, and now instead of software running on a server sitting in a data center somewhere, and where we, as the IT administrators, the IT pros, we were responsible for either building software the business needed or buying it. Most of the stuff has moved up to cloud, right? So because most of it's in the cloud, we lose a lot of what we used to have where, oh, you're on premises because you're sitting in the office. And so surely we know who you are. And we've got all these systems on-prem to make sure we know who you are. So instead, now we've got all this stuff like Dropbox and Office 365 and Box.net and Zoom and all these different apps that people are using, because you don't want to build your own video conferencing service, right? Like that would be a ton of work. And if it's not your core business, then it's probably not something your business wants to invest in. So you buy one off the shelf, but you need to make sure that it's something secure. And so most of what you're going to read in here is all about how we've got all these different devices, we've got all these different people, and people are working at home, and they're working from the bus, and they're working from school, and they're working in their apartments, and they're working at the office, and they're using apps that are all over the world. SaaS apps, vendor apps, apps that your teams have built, apps that you might build. And so because of that, the one consistent part in all this is that you and who you are at work is the most important part of the whole equation. Because if I don't know who you are, then I can't make sure that you see the data you're supposed to see, right? So identity is a pretty crucial, pretty critical part of everything, regardless of whether or not you're at work, but even also when you are when you're doing your personal stuff, right? Like I sign into my Xbox, and because all of my like video games that you buy and movies that you buy on Amazon or whatever, all of those things are linked to some kind of an identity, because, otherwise, how will we know who paid to watch John Wick 98 times, or who downloaded Halo, or who downloaded Madden or whatever?
Hey, JP, can you close the notepad? People are more keen in following through the browser.
Oh,
so zoom in and close the notepad.
Yeah, sure. So anyway, so there are a whole lot of words here that talk about the importance of identity and securing your identities, and you're free to read it. But the net result of all of this is that your identity is who you are, what you have access to, and then who controls that access is where they all sort of come right here in the middle, right? And there are two main kinds of software that we see. There's software that you are going to build for your business, for your work, for your school, etc. So an expenses app, some complex line of business app that helps your business make money, right? Some super custom process of your own. The other kind of software is software that you buy, right? So maybe you work for a company that builds software for other people to buy. And so both of those scenarios, they sort of are, they're similar, but they're not identical. Because if I'm building software for my internal users, that's very different than how I would build software for a lot of other people to use where I'm selling that to them, right? But you still have the problem of, okay, well, how do users get access to various resources, right?
Yep.
So our platform is really kind of two different platforms. And one of them is all about work. So you're at work, you're at school. We need to know who you are, more of like I don't want to call it traditional, but kind of like a traditional IT environment. You're at work, you're on your computer, you're sitting at home and you're on your work computer, whatever. You need to sign in to work, right? And so by signing in at work, we're going to use just a normal thing called Azure AD. So you'll hear it called Azure AD. You may also hear it called Microsoft Identity Platform. But Azure AD is sort of the main directory, the main resource, the main repository of all your user data when you're using Azure Identity. There's a feature of that called B2B, which is all about, I need to invite users from other places to come and work with me. So if I hire you as a contractor to come and help me plan an event or something, I need you to be able to sign in and do work with me. And maybe we talk in teams, maybe we share some PowerPoints or whatever together. So that's something called Azure AD B2B. We're probably won't get into B2B until close to the very, very end, but useful to know that it exists. And then the last one's B2C. And B2C is all about building software for the internet. So I'm using B2C. It's because I'm building an app I'm building the next Twitter. I'm building the next Uber. I'm building the next, some sort of app that the internet is going to use as a whole, not just an application for my internal
organization. Yeah,
my internal organization. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. So once we have that, then we get into the resources themselves. And the resources are just things. They're things that exist in your directory. They could be people or users. They could be services that you build, like APIs that you build. They could be APIs that you're purchasing. So if you buy Office 365 from us, for example, you're going to get an API called the Graph, and that Graph is going to give you access, is going to be like a big API for accessing email and calendar and all that sort of stuff, right? So the resources themselves are all the things that hold data. They surface data, they serve data through an API, but they're ultimately all the things that are going to hold your business data or your customer data or whatever.
And let's not forget Azure and Azure resources, right? That's a big component as well. It's the gateway to your Azure resources.
So the other big one are policies, and policies are all about, well, under what conditions can you access a resource? So under what conditions can you access your email? Under what conditions can you access your calendar, that sort of thing, right? So by using these policies, we can say, well, this user is only allowed to access their email from a registered device. So I can only get my email on my cell phone if my cell phone is registered with my company or registered with my organization, so that they can put additional policies on it, like requiring a fingerprint or a face or something like that. But policies could be anything. Some of them are administrative in the sense of an administrator is going to go in and say, you require MFA for this, and some of them are going to be your app. So in some of them, your app is going to be, enforce things. So your app might say, well, I only want users who are in a specific role to be able to see this part of my application or something similar, right? So some of that's going to be enforced on the Azure AD side of, well, have you done MFA or whatever? But other parts of that, your applications are going to be responsible for enforcing. So the next big part is all about OpenID and OAuth. Now, we've spent a bunch of time talking about OpenID and OAuth in other places, so we'll do kind of a quick primer on it for the purposes of what we need. But OAuth itself, if you're familiar with OAuth or you've ever heard of OAuth 2, OAuth 2 is all about, how do I give access to a different party? How do I give this other party access to my data? So imagine you've built a phone app, a cell phone app, and you want to look at somebody's Facebook photos or something, right? You don't want to give that app that you've never used before that you downloaded from the store, you don't want to give that app your Facebook password, because that'd be pretty dangerous. So instead, you sign in at Facebook and say, hey, this app would like to see your photos. Are you cool with that? And if you say yes, then now that app can see just your photos, right? It can't see your friends list. It can't see your other data, right? You think about like your Gmail or your Outlook.com email. It's the exact same way. I want this app to look at my Outlook.com calendar, but I don't want it to have access to my Xbox account too, and I don't want it to have access to my personal Azure or to my email even. I just want it to have access to my calendar. So we do that with something called OAuth. And OAuth is called an authorization framework. So it's all about saying, hey, this app is allowed or authorized to access this tiny sliver of my data. Can't access all of it, can only access one little bit of my data. The problem with that is that developers were abusing those tokens, and they were looking at them themselves and saying, oh, that means, so John gave me access to his inbox, so his name must be John, right?
Abuse rather than use, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of we kind of laughingly call it access token abuse, where an application that you might be building that needs to connect to somebody's Gmail is looking at what the access token has in it, right? From Google. The problem is that access token isn't intended for you. It's intended for Google. So Gmail is going to get that token and say, oh, okay, I issued this and I am going to allow this and I'm going to return back mail for this specific user. It was never intended for your mobile app or your web app to say, oh, well, because the person's name is John, then that must mean that his name is John. Hey, John, how's it going? Right? Welcome up in the corner. So then enter OpenID Connect. OpenID Connect was a way to say, when a user signs in, not only do I want to get access to go do something, not only do I want to get access to access, John's mail or his calendar, but I need to know who he is too. I want to know his first name and his last name and maybe his email address so that I can put them in my database or put his name up in the top corner of the screen or whatever. And that's what OpenID Connect is all about. So OpenID Connect was a way for us to sign in a user and know who they are in our app. And then OAuth is a way for us to access their data in a different service, right? That's probably about all we're going to talk about those, at least for now. But you're going to see both of these over and over again throughout the next few days. ID tokens, of course, there's some stuff here you can read about ID tokens and access token. How do you obtain one? Blah, 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 blah. We're going to be obtaining some here in just a moment, so we really don't have to worry about this too much. And then user and application access tokens. Now, the majority of the work that we're going to be doing is going to be focused on user access tokens. This is all about a user signing in and saying, hey, give me access to this user's data, right? That means if I sign in, that app is only going to get access to my mailbox. And if Christos signs in, it's going to get access to Christos's mailbox. But that's it. It doesn't get access to all of the email that exists in Gmail. It only gets access to my mailbox and Christos's because we explicitly said, yeah, this is cool. We don't mind, right? There's also something called an application access token. And this is something that is more of a server-to-server kind of a thing. So my application, a user doesn't sign into it. It's a headless app, right? They don't sign in. They don't do anything directly. Instead, I needed to go read all of the mailboxes. And so that kind of thing, you see it a lot more in like scheduled tasks and cron jobs and integration scenarios. So if you want to like bulk take everybody's mail out of one service, for example, or read everybody's calendar, that's when we get into application permissions. But we probably won't be doing a whole lot of application permissions through here, but just know that they do exist, and they exist for some very specific reason, which is you don't always have a user. Sometimes you need to access more than just a user's data. But they're very, very helpful when it comes to big integration kind of scenarios. Okay, so let's go on to our next exercise. Continue button down here at the bottom. And this is going to talk about all the different types of tokens that we're going to use in Microsoft Identity, right? Now, the way this is laid out is a little strange, I'm not going to lie. We're going to have an exercise page, and then we're going to have a different page that actually walks you through the exercise, even though if you look at pages 3 and pages 4, they're like 90% the same. There's still a little bit of detail missing. I don't know, but we're going to walk through it together. So I'm going to move my screen over here to one half, and I'm going to open up VS Code over here on the other.
We have a question from YouTube. Sida is asking, can you restrict application to only a certain mailboxes or one mailbox?
In Exchange, you can. So it's called resource-specific consent. Resource-specific consent is a way for you to say only allow mailbox ABC as opposed to all mailboxes, and still do it with an application level account. So that's an Exchange specific feature. There's also one specifically for Teams. So it's not necessarily a part of the spec. It's all about how the service provider elects to implement it. Okay, so I'm going to open up VS Code here. I'll get it over here on the side. I guess we could have done this the other way, but we'll put this over here in the chat. So this is step 3. So if you're in the getting started with identity one, you look at units 1, 2, and 3, etc. You'll see exercise 3 here. Okay, so we're going to create a Node app. So hopefully you've got Node installed by now. Let me go ahead and get my terminal up over here. So I'll zoom this in, make it a little bit easier to read. Okay, so we've got our terminal, and this is just PowerShell for me. I'm not using anything fancy. So I'm going to create a new directory, and we'll just call this MS-Learn module 1, exercise 1. Create a new folder, MS-Learn, and we're going to run npm init y. That'll go ahead and create us a Node app, right? And then we'll do an npm install express Morgan, or Express, of course, being one of the more popular Node web servers. So, okay, so we've got our Node created. If we were to go look at the directories, you'll see there's a Node modules folder, and we've got our package.json. That's really about all we need right now. So now we're going to open this up in VS Code. I guess I shouldn't have opened code already. So you can just do code period, or you can open VS Code and navigate to the folder. So we're going to put code over here on the side. And we'll zoom this in a little bit. And so you'll notice all we have right now is a node modules folder, package lock, and package.json. So the next thing we got to do is we got to create our server file. So we'll add a new file. You can use this, and we'll just call this server.js. And for the purposes of this exercise, it is quite literally copy and paste. But we'll look
Copy paste.
We'll look and see what this code is actually doing. I'm going to collapse my thing here to make a little bit more room. So you'll notice all we're really doing is pulling in Express and pulling in Morgan. We are setting a specific port that we're going to use and that we're going to be using to run our app. And then all we're saying in this one is any request should always return back an index file. Of course, if you notice, we don't have an index file yet, so we've got to go remedy that. So this is in a file called server.js. It's just right underneath the main sort of trunk or the main root of your directory. So let's go and get our index. So this is our index file. So we'll add a new folder or add a new file called index.html. And index.html is going to have a bunch of stuff in it. And we'll go through that here in just a minute. But primarily, we've got a button at the top with a sign in. We get a little welcome message. And then we've just got a place for us to go and dump a little bit of code. Now, there's a bunch of code here for dealing with if somebody's using Internet Explorer. So, because if they are, then the way some of our libraries work is a little bit different. But we really don't have to worry about that too much as of right now. This one here on line 27, this msal config. So msal is our primary library for interacting with Microsoft Identity, and msal is something that we are going to have to go and that we're going to have to start working with. That's how we're going to sign users in and get tokens and whatever. And we're going to be coming back to this. So remember line 27, this block from 27 to 37, because we're going to be back here in just a minute. So next we've got our graph configuration. We're going to go call the graph, which is our big API for getting user data. We're going to call the graph and we're going to get back me. And me is just that. It's just what's a little blurb about me, my basic info. We're going to go and get that. And then we've got a couple other things down here. And you'll notice these two to-dos. We've got to add some code and add some functions that we're going to do next. So we'll scroll down through this. And now we've got a few functions that we've got to add. Some of these are kind of like helper functions. Some of them are actually going to be doing a little bit of work, but we'll go ahead and start adding them in. So this is the first function that we have after our index page. And this one goes in right here above this function. So this is called update user interface. Update user interface is, you can kind of think of it as a helper, because if we take a look at what it's actually doing, all it's really saying is welcome username. So it's going to say welcome whatever your username is that comes back from the graph. So this is kind of like a helper. And then there's also a sign out button, so we can sign users out. So there's not really a whole lot of complexity here. So let's keep going down, and we're going to get to this big sort of gnarly looking one here. And we'll just put that underneath update user interface. This one is called acquire token and get user. And this is where we're going to be doing, we'll actually be doing quite a bit of work in this method. And this is really where most of the magic's going to happen. So if we look in here at this acquire token and get user function, the big one we're getting is first we're going to try to find our account by username. So we're going to try to find an account that we know is already signed in. So that's the key is, well, has this user even signed in or not yet, right? So we're going to try to find one and see. And if we do have one, we're going to do what's called an acquire token silent. Acquire token silent, this pattern, you'll see this in all of our libraries. So anytime you're using MSAL or Microsoft Authentication Library, you may have heard of its predecessor, which was called ADAL for Active Directory Authentication Library. Anytime you're using MSAL, this is going to be the pattern, which is we're going to try to get a token silently. And if we can't get one, we're going to catch the error, because it's going to throw an error. And then we're going to do one, and in this case, it's called a pop-up. Now, you could also just redirect a user. But this pattern of try to get it silently, catch the error, and then do it with a pop-up, you're going to see that pattern everywhere, right? So what we're going to do is if we do get a token, then we're going to go call another function called get user from MSGraph. If that doesn't work, we're going to go try to do this through a pop-up where we sign the user in and the user says, cool, I want to allow this. And then we're going to go get the user data. So we're still doing the same thing. It's just a matter of, do we have a token, has a user signed in or not? And if they have, let's just go and get their data. If they haven't, we got to ask them to sign up and then, or excuse me, ask them to sign in, and then we're going to go and get their data. So let's see get this one back over here a little bit. So let's see what's next. So now the next one, this is for what's called a redirect. So we're not going to do redirects today, but you can do redirects, and you'll notice in some cases redirects work a little bit better. They can be a little bit more reliable depending on the application you're trying to build. So we're going to add it again right up here. Oh, sorry, no, this goes in our code block up at the top. So you'll notice line 52, we have this add code before this line. We're going to put this one here on 51. Yours may be a little bit different, but should be close to 51. Now, what this is doing is saying handle the redirect promise. So if you think about an app that's running, when we go to sign in, we're going to get redirected somewhere else. Like we're going to go over to Azure AD and sign in, totally different website. So what happens is by saying handle the redirect, we're pretty much going to say, hey, just know when I go to sign a user in, they're going to get redirected over to Azure AD. And when they come back, we need to process and essentially be expecting what they're going to come back with. So that's the whole point of handling this redirect, is that if we elect to send a user down a redirect path, then we're going to need to make sure that the application knows, hey, user is going to be coming back. We need to handle them when they come back. So this just goes up here in the code block up at the top. We're not going to be using redirects today, but if for some reason you have issues with the pop-up and you want to use redirect, we can change it down here in this login type and some of our configuration that's up higher. One thing I will say about the pop-ups. In Chrome, if you, this seems to be in Chrome, may also be in Firefox, but I know that in Chrome and Chrome-based browsers, things like Edge or whatever, you'll notice when certain applications, when you get to them, certain sites, you may have a pop-up blocked immediately. And sometimes that's because it's trying to sign you in. Usually sign-in needs to happen based on a user action. So there's a specific type of user action, like a user clicks a button, they click a link, they do something inside the app. That can trigger a pop-up that does not get blocked. But if you just try to do this, if you just tried to like do it on load, for example, in many cases they get blocked. So just something to keep in mind, that pop-ups don't always work. And since we're working in an index.html file right now anyway, this is all happening on the client side. Okay, so so we've got our redirect handler here. Now the next one is our get user from MS Graph. So this is the function that they were referencing a little bit earlier. So let's just put this right above or right below our acquire token and get user. We'll just put this right down here. And what this method's going to do is it's going to make an JSON, or excuse me, an XML HTTP request, so an AJAX request. And is AJAX still what people call it now?
Yeah, it is AJAX.
Is it still called AJAX? I didn't know if that was still called that or if there's a new, more clever name for it. But it's essentially it's a request that goes straight from your browser over to the graph. So we're gonna make an XML HTTP request over to the graph, and just a few checks here to make sure that that was a valid response, etc. And then the big thing you'll notice is we're going to be setting this request header. So we're going to be setting a header called authorization, and the value is going to be bearer followed by the access token. So we're going to get the access token up here in our acquire token silent or in our acquire token pop-up, and then we're going to pass that in as our first parameter. So get user from MS Graph, we're going to just stick that in the headers, and then we're going to go make that call. And when it comes back, we're just going to stuff the response into the HTML, right?
Easy peasy.
That part's fairly straightforward. Okay, so then we have one more here, and this is called handle response. So let's take this one, and this is going to be yet another function that lives here. And there are actually quite a few of them here. So handle response is all about handling the fact that you have signed in. So this is another sort of redirect related task. We have sign in. So our sign in function is just that. Let's go sign the user in. And all it's really doing is making a couple checks to see, oh, have we configured it for pop-up? If we have, then let's do a pop-up. If we haven't, then let's do a redirect instead. That's all our sign in button's doing. And our sign out button, is really just calling logout on this mstyle application object. So it goes and finds our account with this get account by username. And logout is the logout just essentially clears the cache. So it says, oh, these users who were signed in before, I want you to just throw out any of the data that you already know about. Excuse me. Okay. So our code is mostly done, but you remember we talked earlier about line 27. So I'm going to scroll back up over here to line 27. And up here, we have these three values that are right now empty strings. Client ID, authority, and redirect URI. Now, because of this, this isn't going to work because we need a client ID, we need an authority, and we need a redirect URI.
Yep.
Now we need to go and register an app over at Azure AD. So let's get a new browser window open here.
So we explain what an app registration is. Are you going to do this as you go through?
We'll do it. I guess we'll do it as we go.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me change my theme. I think it might be hard to read. Let's see. Let's do. We'll just actually. I guess I could probably do a light one, right? Do we have a light one?
You should have a default light one. I think that would be a good idea, since we're not using the full screen. Interesting. It's the first time that we had this kind of comment.
Yep. Whatever. It's fine. Okay.
Thanks
so
for the feedback.
So we can get back to our developer thing. If you remember the name of your thing, you can actually just go directly to aad.portal.azure.com. There's a link inside of the learning path itself. So you go to aad.portal.azure.com / the name of your directory. So in my case, msreactor.onmicrosoft.com. And when you go there, you'll be signed right in. Now, if you aren't signed in, then it'll be a little bit. You'll have to sign in with the accounts that you already created. But you should get to what's called the Azure Active Directory Admin Center, right? So in the Admin Center, and we'll give everybody a minute to sign out. Of course. I think I might be signed. I'm going to do this in a private window. Sometimes private windows tend to work a little bit better. So let's go over to the portal here. Get signed in. So it was msreactor.onmicrosoft.com. Get signed in. Now you may be asked to set up MFA. So there's this new thing called security defaults, and security defaults within the first few sign-ins, security defaults is going to say, hey, you need to set up MFA. If you do, that's fine. There's an app you can download it on your phone. You should be able to skip it though for about 14 days. After 14 days, however, you're probably going to be required to do it. So just know that might happen. But it's just part of the service, because of course, multi-factor is one of the most important things to keeping as much of your stuff secure as we can. Okay, so you're in the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. And this is it's kind of like an Azure portal, but it's just for Azure AD. You can also get to this directly through the Azure portal. So portal.azure.com, and you can search for Azure Active Directory at the top. So I open up my little side menu here, and we'll have Azure AD users and enterprise applications, right? So Azure AD, and this is sort of your main sort of overview screen where you can figure out and just see sort of the basics about your directory. Things like what license you have. Everybody should have P2 because that's what comes along with the developer directory. You'll see your primary domain, which is important to know. Make sure this is the one that you created in the developer center. You'll also have a tenant ID, and this is an important thing. So we'll, if you want, you can go ahead and copy it. We'll put it over a notepad somewhere and just keep a copy of it somewhere because you're probably going to need it again in a few minutes. The big thing we're going to look at right now are app registrations. So over here on the left-hand side, you'll see app registrations. And here we have a bunch of ads at the top. So you can close these, you can skip them, you can do whatever. And we're going to create a new one. So we want to create a new registration. And by creating a registration, what we're really saying is, I need the way to allow my users to sign in, and I want to use Azure Active Directory. So I'm saying, this is a way to tell Azure AD, hey, I've got an app, and I want users to be able to sign in with it, right?
Yep. You register intent. That's the whole point.
So we'll call this MS Reactor
Node.
We'll just call this module 1. Well, it kind of isn't Node though, right? I mean, it's a Node server, but kind of whatever. Anyway, so then we get to choose what kind of accounts. Now you'll notice there are lots of different things here. There's things like MS Reactor only, my organization only. If you're building line of business apps, this is most likely the one for you. Accounts in any organizational directory or any organizational directory and personal accounts like your Xbox account or whatever. We're not going to use those right now. We're going to use them later. So we'll just stick with a what's called a single tenant app, which is just for your organization.
Mm-hmm.
You can go ahead and click register. So the first answer, the first question of our puzzle is, I need a client ID. Well, what's the client ID? Well, I've created my app, and here we have the client ID. So it's just a GUID. It's also called an application ID. We're just going to take that, and we're going to plunk it over here in our client ID. So that 842C, which is for me, my application's ID, that is our client ID. So it's essentially just saying, hey, this is the application ID that a user is going to try to sign into. The next thing we need to do is build an authority. And the authority is a way to say, the authority is what is going to vouch for who you are. What kind of an app or what kind of directory or what kind of endpoint is going to say, yeah, this user is who they say they are. That's the whole point of the authority. And in kind of in what the word means is it's the authoritative thing that says, yes, this is John, and yes, he's allowed to sign into this app, right? So in order to build an authority, we're going to copy our directory ID, this tenant ID, and we're going to come over here and type in https login.microsoftonline.com / our tenant ID.
Is there any place where people can go and find that information if they don't remember what that is or where it comes from?
So it should be, if I can find my browser window here, it should be in the exercise itself. So in the exercise itself, so we did a new registration, blah, 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 blah. That all looks good. That all looks good. We're going to come back and do this here in a minute. Yeah, so you'll see this in update the web page with the Azure AD application details, and you'll see set your authority to login.microsoftonline.com / directory ID, which is also tenant ID. So
yeah.
Either one of those is you'll hear tenant and directory used a lot interchangeably.
Cool.
So we're going to build this authority string, login.microsoftonline.com / your directory's ID. And your directory's ID is available here under directory or tenant ID. Or you can get it from that main properties page that we got it from earlier. Now, the last thing we need is a redirect URI. And redirect URIs are kind of your main way to secure these apps and make sure that tokens aren't getting into the wrong hands, right? Now, let's see. I guess And
the redirect URI is where the token will be returned as well, right? That's the endpoint where you should be receiving the token.
Yep, that's it. So this is going to be the URL of your application when it's running. Now, I hit the back button, I guess. But anyway, so if you're back at the app registrations page or app registrations view, you can always search for your application, or you can just click it and get back into that view we were just in. Now, the thing that we need to do here, the last thing we need to do is we need to configure authentication. Mm-hmm. So we're going to come over to the authentication blade, and this is a way for us to configure to say, hey, my application is at this specific URL, and it's this kind of application. It's a mobile app, it's a web app, it's a this, it's a that, right? So we do this with the platforms. So we're going to add a platform, and we have web and we have single page app. Now, because this is all running in JavaScript, we're only using Node for the purposes of hosting an HTML page. Technically, it's a single page app because this is all happening inside the browser. And that's an important thing an important distinction to make. When things are happening inside the browser, all this code is executing in your user's browser, not on a machine that you can control. So when that happens, you don't want to leave, you can't leave things like secrets in there. Mm-hmm. You can't leave any, because if I want to see this code, all I've got to do is right click and view the source in my browser, and I've got it. Right?
You hack it. I like it. I love it. You hack
right.
You hack the website.
Hack the planet by right clicking and clicking view source. So we don't have secrets in here, and you'll notice, of course, it looks like these colons have gotten very they're so dark they're hard to read. I don't know what happened to my theme here, but ultimately there's nowhere to put a secret in here because we don't need a secret. So by choosing a single page application, we're telling Azure AD, hey, we're going to have an app, and that app is going to be executing in a user's browser. It's not a server-side app. like an ASP.NET app or like a proper Node.js server-side app. It's React, it's Angular, it's pure JavaScript, it's Vue, it's something that's running in the user's browser. So the way that we have to interact with it is a little bit differently. So under platform, choose single page app. And for the redirect URIs, we're going to use, if I can type, HTTP, not HTTPS, because we don't have HTTPS set up on our local machines. You don't want to do that in production, of course. In fact, we will block you and prevent you from using HTTP.
Yeah.
Anything that is not localhost.
You can only use localhost with HTTP, so you won't be able to register anything else, which is good.
And then based on this code, normally the node host is port 3000. This code has some changes to change the server to be 3007. If you're using an app that you already built, this is going to be the endpoint that the tokens are going to go back to, or that the user is going to be coming from. So feel free to change it. If you're following this code that we've got up here on the side, it's localhost 3007. We can go ahead and put that into our redirect URI over here too. In this window, we don't need to do anything else. You can leave these two unchecked and click configure. And now our app is ready to go. It'll say update application. You should see localhost 3007 in here, and you'll see your redirect URI is eligible for authorization code flow with Pixie. And this is an important thing because historically we used to use something called implicit, and a lot of apps still use implicit. Implicit is all about is a way to get tokens for JavaScript-based apps, for browser-based apps. The problem with it is that tokens end up touching the browser URL in many cases. So sometimes, you'll sign into an app and then the URL will have the ID token in it, or the access token for another service will be in the URL. And the problem with that is that now it shows up in logs, and it shows up in history, and it shows up in all these different places. And we don't want to be in that position, right?
Yep.
You don't want access tokens for some service showing up in your your administrator's logs, right? So now, and that's not to say that it's not it's gone, because still so many things use implicit. Now we have a better option called authorization code flow with PKCE. Authorization code is the server side mechanism for saying, give me a one-time use code after I sign in, and then my web app's going to go and handle the exchange to say, hey, I got this one-time use code. Please give me an actual ID token, an access token. Of course, there's no server because we're in the browser. So what Pixie does, PKCE, is Pixie is a way to say, I was telling my buddy the other day, it's sort of like if I was to text you and say, here's a password, and then I called you immediately on the same number and said, hey, what's the text that I just sent you? It guarantees a round trip. So it means that the user or the application that asked a user to sign in is the same application that is redeeming that one-time use code, right? They could have been, sometimes they can get stolen, especially in the older implicit flow. What Pixie does is alleviate that risk of them being stolen, because it sends sort of a one-time round trip secret. So it guarantees the round trip is secure in the sense that application A asked a user to sign in, and application A is receiving the tokens from that user signing in. But that's it. It's not the replacement for client secret. Since we're in the browser, at least it's better than it used to be, because we can't have a client secret in the browser, of course. Okay. Let me go back and look at our exercise, and that's it. So now we're ready to test it. Okay. So
will it run? That's the question.
So let's open up my colors. My colors have gone very
weird,
very bizarre here. Okay, so let's clear our screens. This is just regular PowerShell. You could use Bash or whatever too. So we'll do node server.js. It says it's listening on port 3007. So I'm going to open up just a new tab in this private browser that I was in. So let's go localhost 3007. And oh, I didn't type localhost correct. That would be part of the problem. Localhost 3007, and it says Microsoft Authentication Library for JavaScript exercise. So this is a good start. And of course, over here we see in our terminal that there's a 200. So I'm going to click sign in, and when we click sign in, you'll see we get this pop-up window. Now mine's zoomed, so it looks a little funny. So we click sign in. Now, 3 things to notice here. The first one, this is my account, right? So this is the account that we created with our demo dev tenant, right? This is the name of my app. So this is the name that I gave the app in the portal, right? So this is what your users are going to see when they sign in. And then it says, hey, this app wants to sign you in and read your profile. So things like your email address, your phone number, your username, etc. And it wants to maintain access to the data you've given it access to. And that means the app can, it essentially means the app can get what's called a refresh token, which is a long-lived token to go back and get more short-lived access tokens with it. We'll talk about tokens more in a bit. So this is what's called consent. So at this point, the application is saying, hey, user, I want to do these things for you. Is that cool? And the user says, yeah, that's cool, by clicking accept. Now, the user could also cancel it. The user might say, hey, you're asking for way too much here, pal. I don't want to give you this level of access. So a user could always cancel, and then you don't get permission. You as a developer don't get permission. But these are pretty basic. Sign me in and maintain data. The profile. Cool. Okay, fine. So I'll click accept. So that happens. And then very quickly, the pop-up closes, and you'll notice it has my name up here at the top. And then it's got just a blurb of JSON. So it has like my user ID here down here at the bottom. It has my what's called my user principal name, my last name, my first name, my job title. Of course, none of this is filled in because it's our demo tenant. But it just has the basics, right? My business phone, which I have no idea what that business phone number is. I'm guessing that goes to sales or something somewhere. But so that's it. So at this point, we've signed a user in and we called an API. So we signed the user in and we called the Graph API to get their me data, those /me, which is just me, right? So let's go back and look at our exercise. So it says, yeah, we're going to open up a browser, navigate to 3007. Cool. Click sign in. All that looks good. We saw that kind of a window. That looks good. And then we saw the expected data.
Yeah, and there are a couple of questions at the bottom, so maybe take 2 minutes to fill this in before we move on to the next module.
Yep, so let's take 2 minutes to fill those in. I'm going to go grab a new drink and fill in these 2 questions, and then if you have any questions, and then we'll be ready to go in just, we'll be ready to go in about 150 seconds, 2.5 minutes. Everybody back? Everybody ready? Be honest. I don't really like the way these questions are worded because I think they're worded in a not terribly they don't seem to be worded in a way that makes them easy to answer. You know what I mean? You're muted, by the way, Christos.
I am indeed. Thank you.
So let's see. Which of the following statements about ID tokens is correct? ID tokens contain basic identity information about the current logged in user. That seems correct, but who knows what the other two are going to say? ID tokens can be submitted in an authentication request, so that's false. To prove the identity of the user. Well, an ID token isn't necessarily used to prove their identity. It's used to prove their identity to you, and that's what I mean. Like, these are not very. These are
well worded. Yep.
ID tokens include both identity information and the permissions a user has been granted, and that is not the case. So the access token is the thing that says, yes, you can do these things. The ID token is the thing that says who you are. So it should be the first one. Then the second one, which of the following statements about access tokens is incorrect? So access tokens can be created by Azure AD for a user or for an app. Well, we know that's true. Azure AD supports multiple OAuth flows that developers use. That's true. And access tokens are submitted by the application to the identity provider to request permissions to a resource on behalf of a user. And that one is false, albeit a very strange kind of a false, because it's just worded very weirdly. But the access tokens are not submitted by the application to the identity provider. One application calls another one, so it makes an API call, etc., with that access token and has the permissions to be able to go and access it.
Yep.
So it's worded a bit weird, but whatever. So we'll check. Who knows? I could actually have been wrong. Oh no, I was right. Okay, good. So
you pass. You can go to the next module.
After going through these a couple times, it's kind of like, wait a minute. Like some of the questions.
Question yourself, right?
Yeah, you're kind of like, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Okay, so I'm going to make my window big again, just so it's easier to read. So let's get on now with Unit 4 of 8. So this is all about account types in Microsoft Identity. So this is all about the different kinds of accounts that you could be able to use. And we talked about this a little bit in terms of what kind of account or what kind of app are you building? Are you building an app for people at work or at your school? Are you building an app like an internal app? Are you building an app that you're going to sell to other organizations? Like, are you going to build the next Dropbox or something like that? Or are you going to build an app for consumers, for just people, like individuals on the internet, right? And not every app fits really neatly into that. A lot of times you get a lot of overlap where you might be building something like a Dropbox, a perfect example, or OneDrive. There's a OneDrive for individuals, and there's also a OneDrive for businesses, right? So sometimes apps sort of span multiple ones of those. But the key is, who is my audience? And from there, then we can start to drive, okay, cool, what kind of application do I need to build? So there's single, multiple, single org, multi-org, and personal Microsoft accounts. Those are our three main account types. And the first one are single tenant apps. And so this is the expenses app, the internal project management app, or something like that. This might be something that you've built for your business or whatever. So the single tenant apps are just that. They're only for people who are in your organization. They're the only people who can sign into it. So nobody else from a different organization can sign into that app. We also have something called multi-tenant apps. Multi-tenant apps are a lot of fun. And multi-tenant apps, not only can you sign in from your organization, but anybody within the Azure AD ecosystem can sign into that app. That means that you as the developer have more work to do, because now you suddenly have to figure out, wait a minute, what organization did this user come from? Have they purchased my product before? Are they only going to see data from their organization? Like, what does this mean? So there's more work for the developer, but instead of you having to go and create an app for every single one of your customers, you can write one app and you can use one Azure AD app registration in order to say, hey, anybody within the Azure AD ecosystem is free to come in and sign into our app, right? So you could build an app and I could sign into it with my work account, or I could sign into it maybe even with my personal account, depending on the kind of app it is. So you'll find some good guidelines in here for building multi-tenant apps. The big thing about a multi-tenant app is, and one of the biggest reasons we see customers doing this, a multi-tenant app lets you as the developer say, hey, I want my customers to deal with who can sign in. So you're essentially delegating a lot of administration away from you as the developer, where you've got to go build a portal that lets your customers, say Joe can have access to these things inside of my app. You're now saying, let my customers administrators deal with that. Let my customer administrator determine if they need to use MFA, because I don't care if they use MFA. It's their business data. So if they want to protect it, then let them do it, right? So those policies are set by the administrators of your customers instead of being set by you, and instead of having to be implemented by you, which is key, especially when you look at things like MFA. Do you want to have to go buy an MFA service and then figure out how to implement it, and then have all your customers have to register from 5-10-year-old cell phones and text messages and all that? I don't want to deal with that personally. I wouldn't want to if I was going to build something new. And so instead, with multi-tenant app, we can say, hey, let the administrators deal with it. I don't want to deal with it as the developer or the service provider. I just want to let my customers determine what's most appropriate for them, right? So then we get into apps and service principles. It's funny that this is only one paragraph. Because anybody who's used Azure AD, so many words have been written about the difference between an application and a service principal, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're really, really closely related, but they are not the same thing. So if you're familiar with writing code, you can think of an application as almost being like a
class or an object.
You can almost think of it as being a class, yeah. Mm-hmm. And the service principal is an instantiation of that. It's an instance of a specific application, right?
Yep.
So the application is globally defined. So when I create an application, it's globally defined for all of the Azure AD tenants that are in the world, right? In a multi-tenant app. In a single tenant app, it's only defined inside of my directory, and so be it. But what we're going to talk about here doesn't really matter. The service principal is a specific instance of that. In a single tenant app that's just for your internal use, it doesn't matter because they're identical. The things that are on the service principal are going to match the things that are on the application. The app IDs are going to be the same, etc. However, when you're talking about multi-tenant apps, the multi-tenant apps themselves, the application is defined once in your directory, but the service principal, a new service principal is created in every single directory that uses your application. So if you have 5 customers and all 5 of those customers use your app, you're going to have 5 service principals that are in their directory. Now, you as a developer don't need to worry about that because Azure AD handles all of that for you. So it handles the fact that I'm signing into app 123. It handles the fact that, well, that's actually service principal 456 in customer 1's directory. So all that sort of complexity is handled for you. But because of that split between the two, that's the thing that lets your customer administrators deal with. That's the thing your customer administrators deal with that delegated administration. For you, as the app developer, you're going to be interacting with application objects almost exclusively because that's where you do things like what we did before, where we registered the app, we set the reply URL, we set the platform, all that sort of stuff. That's all done on the application side. Your administrators, however, are the ones who would interact with the service principal more because they're the ones that are going to say, well, if Joe's trying to sign into this app, then he's going to require MFA. Or I only want this app to be allowed for users who it's assigned to. And so I'm going to assign it to this group of users and nobody else can, even in our organization, can use it. Most of those kinds of things are done on the service principal itself. The one other thing, or the only one other time that a service principal is important is when you're doing service-to-service authentication. So when you're doing a cloud job or a scheduled task or something headless where a user doesn't exist, that is all done using the service principal. So service principal can have credentials, and those credentials, you can think of it almost like a service account where I can sign principal and use that to access another application, another API. Say I wanted to read everybody's calendars, we would create a service principal. That service principal would have a read everybody's calendar permission, And that service principal will be able to connect without a user involved, would be able to connect, download everybody's calendar data, and then schedule more meetings, because that's absolutely what we need in 2021. So there's a lot of stuff here and about what those relationships look like. Application object is global, the service principal is local, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's it. So let's move on to the next one, account types. Now, this next one, I have to admit, this next one's going to be a little weird to try, just because it's kind of expecting you to have 2 accounts. If you have 2 directories, like you can sign in with your work account, and you can also sign in with your developer environment account. That's cool. If you don't, it's cool, because we're going to go through it anyway, and you can watch. But you need to have a second account for this exercise, which is, in my opinion, a little weird. Okay, so let's get my window back over here, and let's start cruising through what this exercise looks like. So we're going to create an application that only allows a single organization's users to sign in. Now, this one we're going to do in .NET. For an as yet unknown reason, we're going to switch platforms entirely, and we're going to use .NET.
Why not?
Yeah, because why not, right? So let's get back over here. I'm going to do a clear on my thing here, on my PowerShell here. Clear. Okay. So we're going to create a single tenant Azure AD application, right? So back in our Azure AD portal, oops, I'm in the wrong window here. Back in our Azure AD portal, which remember was aad.portal.azure.com. I'll put this over here in this window. We're going to go back to our main dashboard, go back to app registrations, which is under Azure AD, app registrations, and we're going to create a new one. So this one says we want to sign in with a work or school account, and we're going to add a new one. And the new one's going to be ASP.NET Core. So we're going to add a new one, and we're going to call this MS Reactor ASP.NET EX. What exercise is this? Like 5, I think. I'll just do module 1, exercise 5. Now, in this one, we're going to do a single tenant app. So the only people who are going to be able to sign in are my people, just people inside of my organization. That's what you're going to do for yours. It's going to be very similar to what we did last time. So we'll go ahead and hit register. We're going to copy these 2 values, this application ID we're going to need over here. We're going to go ahead and copy our directory ID again, just in case we need it. And now we need to go add a platform. So we're going to add authentication and add a platform. And this time we're going to do web. Now, because we're doing web this time and not single page, because all of our authentication stuff is going to happen on the back end, not on the front end. So let's do web. And let's see, what redirect URIs do we have configured here? For this, it's going to be localhost 3007. So localhost 3007, sign out OIDC, which seems a little bit weird, but oh no, sorry, that's the logout URL. That's what I thought. It seemed a little strange. So we're going to use localhost 3007 for our redirect URI.
I'm telling you, it's weird using random ports.
And then you'll also notice that it says we need to select ID tokens under implicit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go ahead and check it, because we're doing this workshop, and I don't want to deviate from what the workshop says, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, there are ways to avoid using implicit flow for this, but we won't talk about that today, because last time we talked about it, I got super animated and it wasn't very pleasant. So we're going to check ID tokens. We're going to use localhost 3007. And you'll notice these are also HTTPS this time around, because .NET's going to give us a developer or like a self-signed localhost certificate that knows how to use it correctly. So we're going to use localhost 3007. We're going to use localhost 3007 sign out OIDC, and we're going to check this ID tokens box, and we're going to click configure. So that's going to take a minute to sit there and burn. So when it refreshes, it's going to say add a URI, and we're going to have to add our sign-in OIDC down here at the bottom. This is what it should have been in the first place. I don't know why we're adding it a second time, but whatever. So now we've got localhost 3007, and we also have localhost 3007 sign-in-OIDC, right? So here, by saying redirect URIs, you can have more than one, which is super useful, right? You may have, maybe you want to do one registration for your lower environments, for dev, test, or dev and UAT. you can add multiple ones in here, right? There are some cases where you may even have things like customer1.yourapp.com, although I would caution you that you can't have an unlimited number of these. You can have a certain number of them measured in the hundreds, but you cannot have an infinite number of them, in which case it's worth discussing a better alternative to having many. But if you have different paths within your application that are going to process tokens, maybe you have different identity providers or something similar, you can have multiple places that you allow a token to go back to. So the redirect URI is a way for us to say, hey, when a user signs in, where is okay for me to send them back? So that way you couldn't come in here and use mine and redirect it back to your web application running on a different domain. Now you can now because it's localhost, and localhost means something different to everybody who you ask. But in a normal production app scenario, you only want URLs in here that you control, because if you don't, somebody could start getting access tokens and ID tokens for your apps, which you likely don't want. Okay, so we've got our URIs in here, signed in OIDC and just the root. And now we're going to create a new ASP.NET Core web application. So let's do this. I'm going to open up my PowerShell over here. I'm going to create a new folder, get back out one. Let's see, let's make a directory. We'll call this mslearn mod1 ex5. Create a new folder here. We'll do a .NET new MVC. And then you'll notice there's this auth flag, and we can do single org in here. And then account types. Sorry, that's the this is the output. So if you want to give it a different name, you can. I've already got it into a folder, so I'm just gonna do auth single org. So .NET new MVC single org. Now this is gonna scaffold us a bunch of code, which is gonna be cool because that way we don't have to write it on our own. So we'll run this. Since I'm already in my folder, which I forgot to switch into my folder, of course, every time I always forget.
I do that as well, don't worry.
So we're going to go to ex5, and I'm going to run this again. .NET new MVC auth single org. This is why you use the O, because then it creates a folder for you instead of relying on you to make a folder. Try to get too clever, and this is what happens. Okay, so it says the template ASP.NET Core web app MVC was created successfully. Cool. So now we're here. So let's do a code period, and we'll get our VS Code back up. Ooh, it has new colors this time. It's almost like every time I open it, the colors. Okay.
Keeps you on your toes.
So if we look at our thing, we look at our app, it's a super basic ASP.NET Core MVC app, just regular home controller, index privacy, etc. Nothing too crazy there. Now we're going to have to go over here to our app settings.json. We're going to make a few changes. So let's see. So this is going to tell us, this is telling us the stuff that we need to do. Looks like we're on track. So if we look at our code here, this is in app settings.json. It should have been generated automatically by using that single org flag, or that auth single org flag. This gets generated automatically. So login.microsoftonline.com, we can keep that. The reason that we declare that instance there is because if you're using a sovereign cloud like Azure AD Government, if you're using something like Azure AD Government or Azure Germany or Azure China, your instance will be different. But if you're using regular Azure AD for global that anybody can go and buy with a credit card or whatever, it's going to be login.microsoftonline.com. So our domain name, that's our Azure AD tenant name. So mine was msreactor.onmicrosoft.com. And then we need our tenant ID. So the tenant ID, that's the same as your directory ID, which we copied out earlier. And we'll go back and you can get it from a certain place. Our client ID, that's our application ID that we copied out a few minutes ago. We'll put that in here for client ID. And then our callback path is sign-in-OIDC. Now, you don't have to have any code at this specific path. By setting it here in the callback, ASP.NET is going to wire all that up for you. So we got our domain, which is just our Azure AD directory name that we had earlier. If you don't have yours anymore, or if you lost it or you forgot it, it is easy to get back to. So it's here in your developer subscriptions. it's also in your directory itself. So in the Azure AD Admin Center, you can always go back to your dashboard and it'll be right here at the top. So mine is msreactor.onmicrosoft.com. It's also in your overview right here. So it's virtually, you can't escape it. It's on almost every window.
Five places.
Your tenant ID is also right here as well. So let me get back to my app registration. This is our ASP.NET one. And we'll get this one back out of the way. Okay. So we've set up our thing. So this is our directory ID. This is our client ID, right? This is our application ID. And then our callback path, we want to keep that at sign-in-OIDC. Now, the next thing we have to do is we have to go make some changes to the ports because for whatever reason, we're using
3007.
3007.
Yep.
I couldn't tell you why. But we are. So that's in properties. If you want, you can also required assets to build and debug are missing. If you want to add them, you can go ahead and do that now too. That's just going to add a VS Code folder to your project. So in properties launch settings, here we'll see IIS Express, and we want to change the application URL for IIS. So this one here, IIS Express application URL. We're going to change this to localhost 3007.
You also need to change your, wait a minute, where's the, do you not need to change the second one as well? Like the mslearn module1_x5, because you'll be running under Kestrel, right? You won't be using IIS Express.
Yeah, we'll change that one too.
Cool.
So we're going to change the IIS Express application URL, and that's going to be HTTPS localhost 3007, not just HTTP. We're going to change our SSL port here as well. I'm going to go ahead and change them down here too, because I don't personally really like, IIS Express, and so I'd prefer not to use it. So instead, you can also change down here application URL. IIS Express was going to be a VS Visual Studio thing anyway. So I don't know.
It is a Visual Studio thing. You can't run from the command line on IIS Express.
I don't know why it wants to make it change. Whatever. And we can delete the HTTP one because we don't really need it. So we're going to use HTTPS localhost 3007. You can go ahead and set your IIS Express one. So if you're using Visual Studio, you could set that one here. But definitely, if you're using VS Code, we're going to want this mslearn mod, whatever you named your project. We want this application URL down here to change to, right? Okay, so then the last thing is, it looks like we're going to add some code to our index.cshtml file. So just in our main home view. Now, before we do that, let's go take a really quick look at the startup, because again, most of this came in by virtue of the template. So if we go look at the startup itself, there are a couple of things that you'll notice in here. Primarily, we've added authentication, and we've also added Microsoft Identity Web App. So there's a library called Microsoft.identity.web. That's our newest .NET way to get Azure AD enabled in your application. So if you want Azure AD sign-in, you can use the template, or you can download the NuGet package and just use it this way, right? Then we have add controllers with views, which is just, again, part of the template. And it's going to have this authorization policy for requiring an authenticated user. Now, all this came out of the template. We didn't have to write in this code ourselves. This just comes out of the template. So our authorization policy right now is to require everybody to authenticate. So you can't see any of the app unless you've signed in first. And then we're going to add that filter. And then the last one is we're going to add Microsoft Identity UI to the Razor pages when we add that into the services collection. So that Identity UI package has all of the controllers and views that are required for redirecting you to Azure AD and for consuming what comes back, things like that sign-in OIDC path. All of that code, the log in, log out, those controllers and views are part of that assembly. And by adding them here, they'll be a part of your project. So they'll be registered as routes that your MVC app can go down. So those are the changes that happen in startup. Of course, if you create one without any authentication, you can always come and add this later. It's not like it's the only way to get to it is from the template, but this is what the template does for us. And then down here at the bottom, we just have use authentication and use authorization, because we've added authentication to sign in with that ID token. We've also added authorization to say, hey, when the user comes here, they need to be authenticated. So we have some kind of authorization policy, which is everything needs to be authenticated. Okay, so let's go over and look at our index under views index, or views home index. Pretty bland and boring. So let's copy this out. And I guess we'll just paste it in here. I'm a little, it says we want to add this at the end of the file. So I'll add it at the end of the file. And what this is going to check is if the user has signed in, we want to see all their claims. Now, we didn't talk about claims. We didn't really talk about like what's in one of those tokens. An ID token and an access token tend to have claims. And all a claim is just a property. A claim is a way to say value A or item A has a value of B or whatever. It's just like a key value pair, probably the best way to think about it. So the key value pair of a claim is it has a type and it has a value. And we do what's called a transparent JWT or JSON Web Token. Sometimes you hear people call them JOTs, which I still to this day don't understand.
It's in the spec.
It's not in the spec. It's not in the spec. It's recommended, but it's suggested, but it's not a requirement. Anyway, JWT is JSON Web Token. The JSON Web Token is a format for sending these tokens around over the wire, but you can decode them and look at them. So a token, an ID token or a JWT is just a bunch of base64 URL encoded JSON. So you can, when you get a token, you can look at it and you just see claims in there. They're just key value pairs, nothing too crazy. So all we're going to do here is just show the user's claims, their claim type and their claim value. Okay. So now we're ready to build it. So in your terminal or in your VS Code built-in terminal, we can do a .NET build to make sure make sure we didn't mess up the code anywhere. So do a .NET build. You can do this in your terminal, or you can do it in your terminal in VS Code, which is Control tilde. Excuse me. And then we'll just do let's do a .NET run. So .NET run is going to run our app, and we're going to get the URL that we're expecting, which should be localhost 3007. And there it is. So now running or now listening on HTTPS localhost 3007. So I'm going to open up my other browser here, the one that we've been using for accessing Azure AD. So let's go to localhost, HTTPS, mind you, localhost 3007. And the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to get redirected to go to sign in, because the app says, hey, nobody comes in. That authorization policy says no unauthenticated users. So we got to do this here, right? So make sure it's your name. You may get prompted to sign in. If we did this in a private window, we would have been asked to sign in. Because I'm already signed in a different tab, we get SSO across this tab. So I don't have to sign in again and actually type in my credential. MS Reactor, ASP.NET Mod 1 X5. So that's the application name that we have. And it's just like the other one. View your basic profile and maintain access to data you've given it access to. Because you are an administrator, because you're in your dev tenant, because you're a global administrator, you can also do this for your whole org, and then your individual users won't be asked. So if you check that box, none of your users would ever be asked if they want to consent to this, but I would use that consent only, use it sparingly when you need to, because you want your users to know who they're giving their data to, right? So I'm going to accept this. And you'll notice this also isn't a pop-up window. This is happening, my browser is at login.microsoftonline.com. So I'm going to hit accept, and now we're back, right? So now we're back at the application, and it's got my name up here. Should have your name up at the top. So it says hello, and it's got my username. And then we have a bunch of claims in here, a bunch of claim values. Now, AIO is just a claim that primarily maintains some round trip stuff so that these tokens don't get abused. But we have some basics like your name. So this is my display name. This is what you would maybe put up in the corner or whatever. Your object identifier is here. So this is my user's object ID. Now we'll talk about object IDs here in a moment, but the object identifier is a way to know who a user is across applications within an organization. So if you need to know, it's correct. It's their immutable they're immutable identifier across the organization, not just within
the application,
a single application. Then we have the name identifier down here at the bottom. Now, the name identifier is the subject, and this is specific to this application and user. Okay, so you may also see this claim come up as sub. ASP.NET takes all these claims in and it starts to manipulate some of the names a little bit. So you'll notice things like schemas.microsoft.com. That's not actually what's in the token when the token comes across. We'll go look at a token and you'll see what the values are in there. This is what that token is, though, or this is what that claim is to ASP.NET. So when ASP.NET takes those in and processes them, this is what it comes up with, right? Preferred username. So this is just my username. And then we have the name identifier, and then we have the tenant ID. And the tenant ID is an important one to look at here because the tenant ID, this is my directory. So this is the directory that signed me in. Now, it's key to note here, when we look at in a single tenant app, it'll always be the same tenant ID because I can only sign in from one tenant. When it's a multi-tenant app, however, things are different because I could sign in and Christos at Microsoft could sign in and Joe at Joe's plumbing shop could sign in. Anybody in Azure AD could sign in. And so that tenant identifier, this tenant ID claim, this becomes sort of the main key to know what organization is this user a member of. So the tenant ID claim is very, very important. And if you're not using .NET, that'll be the TID claim. Okay, let's get back over here to our stuff. So we did a .NET build, we did a .NET run, cool. Go to localhost. See, this is telling us to go to localhost 5001. These URLs are all jacked up. But don't go to localhost 5001. I mean, I don't know, because we changed it to 3007. So
correct. Yep.
So we signed in using a work and school account from your Azure AD directory. Now, what's interesting is that some of the things that we see over here do not match. Excuse me. They have they have a whole lot more claims in here than I do, right? Mm-hmm. And if you were watching a minute ago, when we did that consent, it made a note of basic, right? It said basic. Yep. Now, some of that's because these templates have changed a little bit, but you'll know, but when we signed in, it said this app wants to receive basic information about you. So there's actually, we've got this thing called the user profile. We can read the user profile, but we can also read the absolute basics of the user profile, which in this case is really just my object ID and my name and my UPN. So my assumption, if we go back to our code and look, let's go back to our code and see, for some reason we ended up with a basic sign-in as opposed to a normal sign-in or a normal ID token. So let's see. I think that may just be that the code has changed. The underlying code has changed, and that because I don't think we didn't actually configure that anywhere in here.
No,
so I'm pretty sure that the code has changed. So let's go do one more thing before we get back to the module itself. So let's go back to our Azure AD and back to our registration here, and let's look at API permissions. So this is our applications registration. You'll notice we have API permissions here. API permissions are a way to request permission to do other stuff, to read your email, to do these different things. So the one that we have right here is called user.read, right? So user.read is sign in and read users' profiles. What we seem to be missing, however, because if we were to say add a permission, and we look at the graph, we look at delegated. If we look in here, you'll see there's a user.read basic. And user.read basic lets you read exactly what we saw. So my assumption here is that there's probably a little bit of a code change in maybe the newer templates, and those newer templates are the things that are saying
just get the basic claims rather than the full token.
Yeah, it must just be requesting the basic claims. So I don't think it's going to be a big deal because we got the ones we needed, which was primarily tenant and preferred username. But if it's a problem, we can fix it for next week. Okay, so now what it wants us to do is go and sign in from a different organization, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So let's go try to sign into that same app, but I'm going to use one of my other accounts. So we get Visual Studio Code back up. Looks like my app is still running. So let's open up a new Or actually, I'll just use this one because this is my main work account. So let's go to localhost 5001, or sorry, localhost 3007. And localhost 3007. So this is my corporate account, right? So this is my Microsoft account. Has nothing to do with my test account or anything like that. They don't know anything about each other. So let's click this and see what happens. Now it says
you'll get one of the dreaded error messages.
Says the selected user account does not exist in the tenant called MS Reactor and cannot access D945FC1, which is our app, in that directory or in that tenant. The account needs to be added as an external user first. Please use a different account. So this is what would happen if a user who was not a member of your organization tried to come in and use one of your corporate apps, like one of your line of business style apps. Because this is a single tenant app, they can't sign in, right? Which is good. That's definitely what we want, right? We wouldn't want people being able to sign into anybody's application. So let's go look at what we're going to do next. I think next we're going to get into a multi-tenant one. So what we're going to do with this one, in the second app, you'll create an Azure AD application, an ASP.NET Core web application that allows users from any organization or Microsoft account to sign in and look. Now, what we're going to do in the spirit of time, let's get back to our Azure AD Admin Center here. So we're back at Azure AD Admin. Let's go to our applications themselves, app registrations. We're going to create a new app registration. We're going to call this Reactor Mod 1 EX5, and I'll just put like multi-tenant at the end of it. And we're going to do accounts in any organizational directory. So any Azure AD multi-tenant, just like here in this picture. And the redirect URI, you know what? We can go ahead and put it in if you'd like. So no, you're right. We can't do that because we have to follow the thing. So we'll go ahead and hit register. Accounts in any Azure Active Directory. I'm going to go ahead and copy our app ID yet again. This one is C141. We can also go back and edit our other one, but I don't want to add any confusion. So we'll stick to that. So we've got now your directory ID should still be the same, but your application ID will have a new one. That's cool. It should say multiple organizations under supported account types. Now we need to add some authentication config. And you'll notice in here, you also have a choice. So you can change existing apps and you can switch them back and forth. So we're going to add a platform. We're going to add web yet again. We're going to add HTTPS localhost 3007 sign-in-OIDC. And then we're going to do the same thing. Oops. And we're going to, in the sign out URL, and it's going to be sign out OIDC. And we still need to check the access or the ID tokens box, sadly. We still need to check that. So, oh, I know. They want us to create a new one because the new one has because the new one has a template. I guess that's fine. We won't reuse our existing app. We'll do another one. So, okay. So let's get our app registered. We'll do a configure on it to get our thing done. Okay. Back to PowerShell. Go back a folder so that you don't put stuff in there. Make a new one. Make a new folder. MS Learn Mod 1 EX5 multi-tenant. Actually change into your directory this time, unlike me, who tends to forget these things. And now we're going to do this .NET New MVC, but instead of it being single org, we're going to use multi-org. So .NET New MVC --auth multi-org. And you can give it you can do an O with the folder name if you want. I'm already in a folder, so I'll just use this. And it's going to say, yeah. We've created your thing. So let's do a code dot and get our code up. So now we've got our code up, and it's going to be really, really, really similar to the last time. So we're going to open up our app settings.json. And you'll notice this tenant ID is called common, which is very different from our last one. So what common means is it means that anything in the Azure AD ecosystem can log in here. That's why it's called common. There's also one called organizations. So if you only wanted organizations to sign in, you can use organizations. There's also one called consumers, which only allows consumers and not organizations to sign in. By using common, we're saying we want anybody to be able to sign into this. Yep. Now, your configuration still needs to support that, but for right now, that's what it is. So let's take our client ID, and our client ID is our application registration that we had earlier. So the one that we just created. And we're going to take that client ID. Mine was C141. We're going to paste that in here. Our callback path is still the same, sign in -OIDC. Required assets to build, we can add those. That adds that VS Code folder. Now we need to go back into our properties launch settings, and we need to change these yet again. So this is properties launch settings.json. And in here, we're going to update our paths. So we're going to use 3007 for our HTTPS one. If you're using Visual Studio, go ahead and change that up here too. 3007 to 3007. Okay. So we've gotten our code updated and we have our configuration updated. Uh-oh, I lost my screen here. Okay, and now we're going to go update our user experience, which pretty much means we're going to have that same set of claims, that same claim again. So that's going to be in our views home index. We're going to go right down here on line number 10. And we're going to do exactly what we did last time. We're going to show claim type and we're going to show claim value, right? So now we just need to build and run it. If we look at the startup, everything that's in startup should be almost identical, if not identical, and I believe it should be. So we've got add Microsoft Identity Web App. We're still going to require anybody who comes to the app to authenticate, and we're going to add Microsoft UI. So the startup code and everything is identical. Really, the biggest difference is that in our app settings, we don't have a directory ID. We just have a tenant ID of common. So let's run this and see what we get.
Will it run?
.NET build. Everybody makes fun of me when I do .NET build and then a .NET run, but I don't know. I like to know things are breaking.
Oh, .NET run builds and runs at the same time.
I know.
It's fine. Each to their own, right? No judgment.
Oh, it broke because I'm probably still running in my other app. So make sure you stop your other app before you try to start the next one. So we'll do a .NET run. Come on. Okay, so .NET run, we're up and we're going. Cool. So let's open up our regular. So this is my regular browser, right? So let's go to localhost 3007. So this is my, this is a local account, within the same directories. This is my JPDA at msreactor.onmicrosoft.com account. You'll notice it still says basic. That's cool because this is a brand new app. It's the multi-tenant one. We have to consent again. Now, once we've consented, we don't have to consent again, but for right now we do. So if we look in here, we'll see yet again, we've got my user account, we've got my ID, and we have this tenant ID of 06888. 06888 is my tenant, right? So now let's go sign in with another account that I have. So we're going to go to localhost 3007. And now you'll notice I'm using a different account. So this is a different Azure AD account. It's a different corporate style account, right? It's a different work style account. Now, this is what your customers would see, for example, the first time they tried to come to your app. So I'm signed in as me, but I didn't get denied this time. It didn't tell me, oh, you don't exist in here, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say, yeah, that's cool. I can consent for my whole org if I'd like, but I don't need to. So we've got view your basic profile, maintain access to data you've given it access to. Okay, cool. So we'll accept this. And now if we look at our claims, let me put them side by side so we can look. So now if we look at our claims, on the right side, this is a single tenant user, and you'll notice the tenant ID is 06888. But if we look at the tenant ID here on this side, you'll notice the tenant ID is 9834888, right? So this is the key for you because most of these other fields, I mean, my name is still the same, right? My name's identical. My UPN has changed, but people get new UPNs all the time. So that's not very reliable. A lot of people reuse email addresses for their UPNs, or they use their UPNs as email addresses. And that doesn't help because people change email addresses all the time. So you don't want to store a user ID in there, you don't want to store an email address as any sort of primary key in your user database because they change.
Yep.
But if we look at our object IDs, the object IDs are unique and they're going to always be unique. So I could come sign into this. I could change my email address. I could change my name. I could change everything about my user. But as long as I don't delete that user object, the next time this user comes in, they're going to have the same immutable ID. The tenant ID is different though. Because the tenant IDs are different, that's going to be one of your primary keys to determine, oh, I don't want to do this, or I need to do something differently with this user. Because it's even possible that the same user could potentially have the same username in two different directories.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen much in practice, but it's certainly possible that kind of thing could happen. So don't ever rely on email address, because email addresses, of course, too, are not the same as a username. But my username changed. My username's changed since I've been at Microsoft. So like it could be different. So never, ever, ever pretty much don't store things with @ signs as primary keys inside of your database. It's really what it comes down to. Okay, so we built and tested our web app. We noticed that the tenant ID has changed, which is good. Says permissions requested. We went through and did consent. Yep, that's cool. It's all good. Yep, we see the difference. Cool. So we're done with this one. So now time to test your knowledge, and then we'll be out of here for the day. So we'll give you, what is it, 2:52? We'll give you 2 minutes to answer these.
And then we have 5 minutes for questions if anyone has any questions about the module.
Yep, and then we'll get wrapped up and ready for next week. I'm glad that we estimated this one well, because we managed to make it halfway through the things we thought we were going to do today, which is pretty good for the two of us, I think.
It could be worse, yeah.
So. We do need a countdown timer. That would be helpful. I don't know how to.
I wish.
We got to find one. Okay, it's 2:54, so we'll go ahead and start answering these together. Okay, so what's the primary difference between a single tenant app and a multi-tenant app? So say our first choice: single tenant apps reserve the name of the app across all Azure AD directories, while the name of a multi-tenant app can be used in multiple Azure AD directories. That's an interesting choice. We didn't really talk about names at all, and names can be completely arbitrary, so it's not that one.
Yep.
Single tenant apps can only be used in one tenant, while multi-tenant apps can be copied into multiple Azure AD directories. Okay. Yeah. Sort of, because a service principal does get created in each one of those. So this is, again, one of these questions where you're kind of like, because the service principal, maybe service principal isn't copied, right? It's created new from the template of the application. So I guess that's the difference. And then single tenant apps allow only users from an app's directory to sign in, while multi-tenant apps support users from multiple tenants to sign in and use the app. So pretty sure that's going to be number 3 here. What's the key difference between an application and service principal? Application objects exist in the directory where the application is created, and service principal objects exist in each Azure AD tenant where the application is used. Seems pretty rational to me, but let's keep going.
Yep.
App objects are templates that exist in every directory, so that's wrong. We can go ahead and throw that one out. Well, I don't know though. I mean, you never know. I don't want to say it's wrong unequivocally. Service principals exist in the directory where the application is created, and application objects exist in each Azure AD where the application is used. So that is the inverse, I guess. So let's check my answers. Okay, good. You got it right. Every time I click that button, I'm actually getting a little scared now. Like, maybe, I don't know. Okay, so for the last 5 minutes, we've got, so there are 2 more things in here around topology options. Topology is all about sort of what we've already talked about some today around, is your app going to, what kind of people are going to be supported to come and sign into your app? Are you building something that you're going to sell? Are you building something that needs to access the user's office? Are you building something for Xbox? Are you building something for your internal business? The same kind of things that we've been talking about all day long. So this whole thing gets into more of the specific features around B2B and B2C. Feel free to read this at your leisure. There are some specific parts of B2B and B2C that B2B in particular, where a B2B user, which is essentially a guest, right? We invite users to come in from other directories, but we're inviting them to come in and work with us on our own data. It's a big differentiator. It's like if I invited you to come and talk to me in my Teams or in my Slack or in my Dropbox, as opposed to me selling you Dropbox and you sign in and put your own data into it. You signing into a service and putting your own data into it is very much a multi-tenant kind of a scenario. Whereas you coming to work with me on my data in my directory is much more of a B2B, business to business collaboration type of a scenario. Because I still need to control my data because it's my data in that directory, or excuse me, it's my data in my Dropbox. So I'm not going to sell you Dropbox to put your own stuff in. I'm going to let you come in and work with me in my Dropbox or my OneDrive. And so I want to be able to control what you can and can't do. And that's what B2B is all about. That's what B2B collaboration is all about. As a developer, B2B, it raises some interesting issues because, for example, the tenant ID on a B2B user is going to be different. It's going to be the directory that they were invited into rather than their actual home directory. So that raises some interesting things, but in some ways it still is within the context of what that user needs to have access to in that current sort of persona, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll skip over most of that for now. We've got B2C. The key thing to remember about B2C and to walk away with from today, B2C is a wholly separate directory. B2B is a feature inside of a directory. So like our directory that we created today, our sample one or your demo one that you can get from the developer side, B2B is a feature. So you can invite users into that directory to come and do work with you. B2C is a wholly separate directory. So it's completely separate from the one that we have today. And the feature sets are a little bit different between the two. So what you can do in B2C does not necessarily reflect what you can do in Azure AD and vice versa. But B2C is all about building apps where you want building apps for the internet, for individuals to sign in, and where you as the developer want to have a ton of control over how people sign in, what their experience looks like, what kind of data sources you might get data from, all sorts of different things. So B2C is incredibly customizable, but it's geared towards you build an app for the internet, not you are an administrator and you need to go and administer 10,000 users who work at your company. Very different set of features that are in each one of those. And we'll get into those next week. In the interim, so we'll be back next Monday and we're going to continue down this path. In the interim, if you'd like, you can join our Discord. The link's up here at the top. It's aka.ms/45show/discord/join. And there's a channel in there just for people who are doing this course along with us. Feel free to ask questions in there. There are a bunch of people from our broader community who are there, who come and hang out and answer identity questions and make fun of Christos and I. Actually, they seem to do that all the time. But we'll be back next Monday on this channel to continue down our path with this. If you're really into identity, or if you're just kind of bored, tomorrow morning, we're going to do our regular show that we call the 425 show, which you can find at aka.ms/45 show, where we are going to be interviewing people and building some code, some identity related code. So please come and hang out with us in the morning. And if we don't see you tomorrow, we'll see you next week. So Rebecca. Uh-oh. Did we lose Rebecca? She's still here?
Technical issues, maybe?
Okay, I'm here.
You're back.
I'm here.
Well, we can't hear you.
It wouldn't let me. Can you hear me now?
You're back, but you're still muted. We can see you, but we can't hear you.
Weird. Okay, hang on.
We can hear you and see you now.
You can? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
I can't
So
hear
thank you guys so much. Sorry, this is the first session that
You tell
I
me what she's saying
personally run
afterward.
on StreamYard. So playing with all the features and everything like that. So thanks for your patience, everyone, as well, on this. It's a lot better than Teams. Some other sessions that we've run in the past, a little more fun. So as discussed in the chat earlier, we have the upcoming March 15th session, same time, same place, next Monday. Just check out, there's a different join link. So whichever avenue you came through, whether it was Meetup or our website, definitely check that out. We also have a few other places that you can visit that are Microsoft Reactor. You've got our YouTube channel, which I dropped in the chat as well. You've got our main website, which has all of our calendars, everything listed. You can see us on Twitter. We always are posting interesting and upcoming events there. And we also just recently started a monthly newsletter. So if you don't belong to that, it's a great resource. It targets your local events. You tell them where you're coming from, and it'll give you a region of events happening within your time zone. So definitely worthwhile to check out. And then last but not least, we had a survey that I dropped into the chat just a little while back. The event code for today was 13128. Just if you have the opportunity to fill that out, submit that, that would be fantastic. Really appreciate that. And then just circling back here for a moment, just wanted to say thank you so much to JP and Christos. Really appreciate you all coming onto the station today and giving us your time. 2 hours is a lot to ask for, so I really appreciate it. And then we'll be back next week. Let me just take a quick peek at the chat. Most sessions, that's great. Okay, cool. Make sure to join us on Discord. All right, yeah, definitely check out their station, 425 show. That's awesome. It's lots of laughs. I am not a technical person. I'm an event person. And I was just laughing the whole time. I had no idea what they were talking about, but it's hilarious. And at the wrap
Is
of
that a
that,
good thing or a bad thing? I don't know.
no, it's great. It's great. You guys, the banter is real. The banter is real on that station. It's wonderful. And they have some really interesting people that pop on too and help out as they cover a lot of interesting material. So